All this cycling. Well done, Max. Excellent. Okay. Right, we're ready to reconvene the second stage of today's Environment, Transport Overview Scrutiny Committee. This section 11 now is the start of where we look at the overview and scrutiny of a number of items involving the development of the unitary structure of the local government in Leicestershire. This report, which was presented to the Cabinet at a meeting on the 16th of October, members should have the copy of, I think it's on our environmentally friendly paper, I think if I'm right. Is that right, Bill? Happy with that? We will deal with each section separately, after which members will have the opportunity to ask questions specifically on the area of the report, and there will also be further opportunity at the end to ask any further questions or raise any comments not covered by the early discussions. The comments raised will be submitted to the Scrutiny Commission on the 14th of November. So I'd like to now welcome Simon Lawrence. Where are you, Simon? We haven't got Simon. I'm looking forward to seeing Simon. I'm sorry about that, Tom.
I apologise.
That's all right. Yeah. Somebody said you're better looking than him, but well, I'll have to take as I don't know him too well, mate. Okay.
Before we start this afternoon's session, can I just raise one or two points I'm concerned about? Our MPs are opposed to this reorganisation. The Minister is opposed to the organisation. The districts are opposed to the organisation, or district leaders have written in opposing this reorganisation, and we've got the Somerset equation. That being the case, why are we still pursuing this rather expensive departure, taking officers away from doing work they were going to do initially? This is extra work that's being put on them. The county councils are in a difficult financial situation. To divert them from their budget requirements will make even bigger holes in it, and I can't really see the point in going down this route when all the powers that be say it's not going to happen anyway. So to me it seems a complete and utter waste of members' time and officers' time going down this route if there's no hope of it happening within the near future, in fact in the long distance. So that is my comment, and I think that's the view from my division, not just me, it's from my division, and it was announced in the press. Lots of people have said to me, well, why are you wasting time doing this? It's never going to happen. And I think Mr. Bill has also had the same from his constituents as well. So
okay.
Can you please explain to us why?
Yes, I will. Before I go over to the lead, Blake, I'm sure a number of people have expressed this, aware of the information. We've been asked to continue with the process to discover what the process brings up. So it is an investigation to be continued. That's what I've been asked to do as chair of this meeting. I do understand your concerns. I would rather, because we're sitting here now, I'd rather go through the process, and maybe that question you ask at the end after we've gone through the process. Are you okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. Does that answer that for you, Blake, or do you want to add something?
Broadly it does. I just want to make the point, and then we'll move on to the actual report. The County Council is sovereign. We recognise that the MPs have sent some correspondence into the County Council expressing their position, and we also recognise the position of the leaders of the district councils, but of course there are many stakeholders within Leicestershire. The County Council has gone through a democratic process, through a cabinet process, and it's been discussed, I believe, at Council in terms of the process of moving forward with exploring the possibility of a unitary council, and this meeting forms part of that process. Therefore, as we have democratically decided to put this on the forward agenda, I think it's incumbent on this panel to consider the paper before us and do a justice to the report before us too.
So I think taking that into account, which is a fair comment, and thank you, very much, Blake. We go with the process this afternoon. We've got the papers to follow. I think we do it properly, cordially. We're all sensible, and let's make the most of an opportunity to explore. There's nothing wrong with that. I think we all grow old. We all hopefully get more mature, and there's nothing wrong with learning new things, because I'm always into that. So I'll carry on with my introductions. But thank you for that, Bill. Thank you. That's a very Irish name there, Declan. It is. My family's Irish. Nothing wrong with that, eh?
I'm not the major programs manager. That's Simon. I'm the assistant director.
We'll get it right somewhere in my notes here. I'll get somewhere. I hope you're a Gaelic football fan then. Okay, we'll let you off then. Okay. Others, I think we all know Anne. Mr. Payne, lead member. We've got Ian, you're not on there. We've got Ian and Joe. Is anybody else I've missed out? We got Tom. I said Tom. I did say Tom. I said you were good looking. Tom, come on. You were right at the beginning.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Tom Pennell, Assistant Chief Executive, and I contributed to the Cabinet report that was considered in October. By way of introduction, this report will be presented in 4 parts, with the opportunity for members to ask questions after each of those sections. I will introduce the report, after which Declan will set out the financial situation, and there will be an opportunity to ask questions then. I will then summarise the model unitary structure, followed by a presentation of the options set out in the report, including both the non-financial and financial appraisals. And the Director of Environment and Transport will then set out the content of the appendix, which describes service provision in a unitary structure from the perspective of her department. As you mentioned, Chairman, the key themes discussed at today's meetings, along with those issues recorded at the other committee meetings this week, will be presented to the Commission at its meeting next week on the 14th. By way of background, as you are aware, on the 16th of October, the Cabinet received a report which set out outline proposals for a unitary structure for Leicestershire, and Cabinet agreed that now be made subject to engagement with key stakeholders, and that process is underway. The report sets out the history of local government structures in the UK and Leicestershire, and presents findings from a literature review and experiences from other councils who have gone through the process of unitarisation. The report then sets out a model unitary structure which describes a possible governance structure for a unitary council, including the role of area committees and the possible future role of town and parish councils. The report then describes 2 options which have been identified, a single unitary and a dual unitary option, and goes on to present a financial and non-financial appraisal for each before setting out conclusions at the end of the report. And I'm going to summarise those elements of the report after Declan has presented the financial situation, and I'll pass over to Declan now.
Thanks, Tom. I was just going to talk briefly about the financial situation impacting local government and the council at the moment, rather than sort of the detail of the unitary case. And the poor state of the nation's public finances have been well reported over the last decade, and government's recent narrative has changed, and it's sort of suggesting maybe more good times are ahead. However, the budget that was presented by the Chancellor was very optimistic, and there are plenty of opportunities for things to go wrong. And the Chancellor did indicate that public spending was going to increase at a faster rate than inflation over the next period, and this has been driven by the additional money being given to the NHS. If you take that out of the equation, all of the government departments would just go up at the rate of inflation. Compared to this present, this would be a good result. However, it's worth bearing in mind 3 caveats. First of all, that assumes that all departments are treated the same. Against education, defence and welfare, which is worth bearing in mind, is sort of still further cuts to take. This is by no means a certainty for local government. We've also got this is just flat increases in line with inflation, whereas we've got service population growth and need growth, particularly in the sort of key areas of social care. And also it's depending on costs being able to be contained within inflation. Although this is an aspiration that we do try and meet, it makes it more difficult when things like the national living wage rules change, which increases those costs at higher than inflation. So whilst the pace of cuts may slow, it's like for Leicestershire to balance the books, we're still going to need to increase council tax and find further savings. To date, through austerity, it's been county councils that have fared worst. The number of organisations now required to make emergency savings show that whilst Northamptonshire could have delayed the predicament that they found themselves in, it was probably inevitable. And it's worth bearing in mind Leicestershire does receive less funding than Northamptonshire. Leicestershire has coped better than most of its peers by planning ahead and keeping financial sustainability in its own hands. But even with this good track record of saving delivery, we have been dependent on maximum council tax increases and a strong local economy. In the current MTFS, service demand from adults, children and special needs, plus inflationary costs such as the national living wage, are driving about £90 million worth of additional costs over the next 4 years. So even with a flat government settlement, these pressures won't stop, and they won't stop after the 4-year planning horizon. The estimate in the unitary report was for about a £10 million per annum gap after the maximum allowed council tax increase, which obviously would need to be found from savings. Within Leicestershire, the impact of austerity hasn't been felt evenly. Social care has been the service that have experienced the most intense demand pressures, and funding has favoured district authorities. There are signs that this may be starting to change. So, for example, some districts' new home bonus funding has been diverted to social care. Benefits of business rate growth that government's already announced that they're going to strip this away from the existing beneficiaries. And the concerns are starting to grow around the increased costs of dealing with homelessness. So as things stand, the outlook is gloomy for local government. There's a lot of uncertainty ahead with Brexit, local government funding reforms, or even just a sort of a traditional recession. Leicestershire has an expensive structure of local government. Reform offers the opportunity to make significant cost savings while protecting the frontline services delivered by district and county councils. That's all I was going to say, Chair.
Thank you, Declan. Do we come back to you now on this, Tom, or? Okay, can we have some questions? Any questions, refinance? Dan, first.
Thank you. Have you any more detailed information that you can pass to us today about, you know, you've sort of skipped along nicely through some figures, but there is obviously serious problems ahead regarding funding. Most observers know that, but I don't know the detail. I just understand government's budgets, our budgets, an explosion at the other end of our service demand. How sort of severe could it be? Can you give me any figures on that?
If we take sort of, I suppose, a fairly optimistic case, that if we got an inflationary increase from the government coupled with sort of council tax increases, our growth that's driven by services tend to run in the region of £10 to £12 million per annum, and the bulk of that is children's adult social care, and it does tip into areas like environment and transport through the sort of provision of transportation service as well. So it's probably that order of magnitude that you're looking at, is that sort of, like I say, about £10 million per annum on an ongoing basis.
Thanks. It's a question to Mr. Keegan. Yeah, we had a paper some years ago, about 3 years ago, I think, from Ernst & Young. It was very much a desktop exercise. I don't think it was pretended to be very profound, but indicated that there would be a £30 million per annum saving from the sort of exercise that we're here to talk about today. The other end of the scale, listening intently to John Mann on the BBC Politics Live programme on Sunday, saying, "Oh, you know, all role restructuring costs more money. You know, it's not going to save 30 million. Going to a sort of populist idea, if you like, it's going to cost us in the long run." Can you comment on how safe these figures are of 30 million a year saving? Is it going to be higher and lower? And what would you say to the argument that is made that, well, all restructuring costs, why do it? Thank you.
So as we pick up the cost one first, it will cost money, and this is a big exercise. Obviously, if you're talking about change over 8 organisations, whichever option you go with, the single unitary or the dual unitary, there is a lot involved. And as well, to deliver the savings, there's obviously a lot of kind of, I don't know, IT costs, redundancies, things like that. So the cost of the change, you are looking in the order of magnitude of 15 to 20 million, which is obviously a significant amount of money. But that is just a one-off investment cost. Once you've made that initial investment and the change has happened, the savings that you deliver will continue then year after year. And the £30 million that you quoted, which is kind of the EY figure and sort of also the latest updated numbers that we've got at the moment, seems to be about the right order of magnitude. So you are laying against that sort of initial investment of up to 20 million against 30 million each year. So I've never seen any of the cases, and there's been a few different studies, even studies led by sort of district council, the district council network, have never suggested that you wouldn't make savings from a reorganisation. There's other non-financial aspects people maybe object to it, but I've never seen any study, any business case that would support Mr. Mann's assertion. In terms of the certainty of the 30 million, obviously sort of spend quite a bit of time as well looking at what other people have come up with. And it's become a reasonably well-worn path now. There was quite a few reorganisations that took effect in 2009. We've obviously had the Dorset case and the Buckinghamshire case recently. Oxfordshire had put a proposal into the Secretary of State that I think is just on hold at the moment. So there's been, outside of Leicestershire, outside of the sort of the work we've done recently, Ernst & Young work, you do tend to find that the benefits from reorganisation come to a similar sort of value. Now, obviously, each county area is different, but it tends to equate to about £4 to £4.5 million per organisation abolished. Seems to be the way you can kind of, I suppose, find the pattern, as it were. So, you know, the more organisations you have to abolish, the more savings you get out there. So we're pretty confident we're pitching the right ballpark, mainly because, you know, the work that's been done locally in Leicestershire suggests it, but also it's supported by all the work that we've seen sort of around the country as well.
Thank you, Max. Bill.
Yes, I'm a bit confused because the report talks about more straightforward having one unit authority. But then we hone down on it, we find we've got to have area committees, town councils and parish councils. So it's not going to be simpler at all because we've got another layer coming now, area committees. If you've not got a parish council, which in my district we haven't, you know, so it's going to be even more confusing for members of the public. And it's those I'm concerned about. They're the people we should be concerned about. Actual people who live in our county are actually paying these monies over and they want the best possible service. It's going to be more confusing for them if they've got extra levels to go through. So perhaps Mr. Pennell will answer that one.
Yes, thank you. I think the argument is that by bringing together the 8 councils, you can manage services through a single organisation. That doesn't obviously mean that all of the services are delivered from one place. Services are still delivered in localities. And I think quite a bit of evidence has been provided in the report about the confusion amongst members of the public about which councils provide which services. And if I could refer you to paragraph 67 of the report, which refers to web visits and calls made to the wrong council because people don't understand which council provides which service, and clearly those sorts of problems would be overcome by having a single council. But clearly any council needs to think about how it delivers services to local areas, and with a single unitary council or 2 unitaries, having local committees, local area committees, which can deal with some issues at a local level. And clearly there are proposals for planning applications to be considered through area development management subboards and some other locality issues to be considered through local area committees. That's a way of balancing the financial and other benefits from bringing all of the councils together into one organisation, which will bring efficiencies but also enable integration of services, as well as recognising that there are some issues that are better delivered or some decisions that are better made at a more local level, and that there are some services that might, for example, be better delivered by a parish or town council where they want to do that. But clearly most of the services provided by the unitary council would be managed at the level of that unitary council, with some of the activities happening at a more local level.
Something Mr. Pennell said can be overcome by a joint service shop, but seeing they shut most of those down where the county work with the districts, that could be overcome that way. But also parish councils level their own precept, which is unlimited. So we think about the taxpayer, they could be saddled with an even bigger bill, not a lesser bill. Again, the county council's figures, because it was reported somewhere that there could be a reduction in the council tax for county members, but when you add up the possible town council precept, the parish council precept, the people in the ground will actually be paying more money, not less, for a lesser service.
Thanks, Chairman. So just to pick up on a couple of points that have been made there and share my perspective, if I may. Naturally, I'm going to speak positively to the report and the proposals, but I totally understand that members have entirely different views about this particular issue, but I still think it's worthy of exploring all of the details that are before us. The notion that the locality, the management, the most exciting part of this report for me actually is the area committees and the management boards. I think that's a really innovative proposition. With another hat on, you know, as a previous leader of a council, I saw firsthand the planning status. So, for instance, in my experience, you might have harbour planning applications being determined by members, say, from another part of the district, and it always caused a degree of tension within the whole of the district. From what I can see and from what I've read here, the notion or prospect of a management board and an area committee looking at, for instance, planning decisions seems quite interesting to me, and I think that that offers a degree of localism that we haven't yet seen at present. I note the paragraph regarding District Council's network report in 2015. I think it's paragraph 96 on page 87. And it suggested that perhaps the longevity of the current system is testimony to the relative success of, you know, the local aspects. And it goes on to say, whilst the arguments about confusion for citizens and inefficiency remain, a system that allocates local services and local voice to districts and a more strategic and cost-sensitive services to counties has stood the test of time. I think under a unitary system, by looking at area committees and management boards that underpin those area committees, I think we can deliver that localism still, and I think we can enhance it from what we know now. And just one further example in terms of the highways context, I understand the point Mr. Bill Bolter was making in terms of more partnership working, and we'll be aware that recently we've had to discontinue the use of highways forums. In reality, the highways forums were never a decision-making body, because they were made up of councillors from district and county council, and it never had the constitutional support to be able to make direct decisions. Again, I see management boards and area committees under a unitary system having the power and the tools they need to make decisions on behalf of the locality, and I think that's probably an improvement on the current system that we've got at the moment. I just wanted to share my view there.
No, that's fair enough. I've got a few... James, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So, I mean, the report's quite clear in the very, very severe financial problems this authority faces, sort of in the relatively short to medium term, and as I say, that's very clearly spelt out. And we talked as well about the savings potentially that could come from going down the unitary option. For me, there's almost we've talked for certainly my old time as a councillor, and I'm sure long before, about needing fairer funding from central government. And I think this is really about certainly the financial aspect of this. But we need more money from central government. We can reorganise, but ultimately it comes down to getting more money from the centre. How confident are we? And again, I might be asking you to look into your crystal ball here, and apologise, but that if we went down the unitary route and created a Leicestershire-wide unitary council, that would, if you like, solve the problem in the sense that we would then be able to guarantee our financial future on an ongoing basis, or would we be effectively delaying the inevitable and then having the same conversation maybe 10 years from now? Again, I fully accept that it's difficult to sort of forecast that far in the future, but obviously the nature of what we're talking about here is a long-term sort of thing.
As you allude, it's a difficult one to say. Obviously, fair funding is something we do press for as a council, and there's probably more recognition at the moment of the disparity and sort of almost the brokenness of the system at the moment sort of favours London very much over kind of anywhere else. So it's not something that we've incorporated into the financial plans, mainly because it's not in our control, but also kind of governments have indicated it's going to be kind of any changes are going to be sort of a series of sort of damping and kind of sort of smoothing effects. So any benefit will drip in. So although we're hopeful that we'll get some benefit, and like I say, we're probably more confident than we ever have been that something will come, it's not likely to be sort of the silver bullet that solves all our problems. The adoption of unitary, like you say, is kind of it does create a big shot in the arm in terms of helping with the sort of financial sustainability. It releases savings that just otherwise would be impossible to deliver. You know, for example, if I think of my own area of finance, we've got 8 different accounting teams that will produce statutory accounts every year, and all that goes down to just one. So it's kind of, you could never, no matter how efficiently you work, you just can never unlock that sort of magnitude of savings without something like this. So it makes a big difference. Now, obviously, in theory, if austerity and the government cuts just kept going forever, at some point you're back in the same situation. But you can see the way that government's dealt with, in truth, not just Northamptonshire, but any council in trouble. The end result seems to be send the commissioners in and basically force the council to sort of pay for its own solution, as it were. And in Northampton's case, this has been to force it into a unitary structure. And I mean, different people take different views on whether they prefer the sort of the single unitary or the dual unitary, but from a pure financial point of view, Northamptonshire should go for a single unitary because they're going to lose some of that impact from the dual. So it's kind of, by having it in the decision in our own hands, it helps a lot in terms of making that right decision. What's the best option for Leicestershire, both in terms of the non-financial aspects, but also that financial sustainability. It's unlikely if the advantage of sort of going for unitary early that something like Bucks have done is it pushes you almost to the back of the queue where people are going to get into sort of serious financial strife. And obviously the government can ignore Northamptonshire as a basket case. And in some ways, Northamptonshire did bring a lot of the problems on themselves. But, you know, if 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 councils start to go, government has to do something about it. So the further you can get yourself back in that queue, and we've tried to do it with sort of forward planning and early decisions, the better off you are and the more that you can kind of, your destiny's in your own hands.
Still trying to get some tickets for the Northampton games from some of the people at Northampton, but I can't get them at the moment. Hilary.
Thank you. This is the third one of these meetings I've had this week, like a number of us, and I am still working and listening here as the county councillor, not as a dual-hatted councillor, and obviously we have to do for the best of our residents across the county. I'm taking up the point, I think, that was made earlier, I think it might have been Mr. Bolter, about the different levels now that seem to be appearing of administration of a unitary. So you have the county council, as it were, with 110 members. Then you're looking at area boards, and now we're talking about management boards or committees as well, local management boards. I haven't seen anything in the paper in front of me, that because one of the about allowances, I see that we anticipate a saving of allowances for representatives on the county council, because there won't be so many. You know, you're combining the districts, so that instead of having 200 and odd councillors, you're going to have 110, but they will have to be remunerated for doing this. Area boards, well, how many are it anticipated? How will it be divided up? And are they anticipated to have some form of expenses or something, because they're going to have more responsibility? Then we're coming into local management boards, which I think the lead member mentioned could be doing things like planning and things like that. So would they be able to claim expenses? How would they be selected? Would they be standing for election for the different boards? Because one of the savings would be indicated is that we wouldn't have so many elections and we wouldn't be electing so many people, but and I haven't even mentioned parish and town councils, who are going to have more responsibility. So I do think, and I know it's difficult to produce, but it's very hard for a layperson to look at this, and I've got to go out and tell my people in my division and think, well, if you're going to have 2 or 3 more layers in there, you're getting rid of 1 layer and bringing in 2 or 3. How much is that going to cost? Because it's the added costs as well. It's not just the allowances that they could possibly get. I think also it was raised about I've raised it before this week, is the implementation costs. I think they're put down in here at 19 million. Bearing in mind that you're going to be getting, it would be planned under a unitary and with getting rid of the 7 districts, that there are some very senior people, because you're looking more, the savings would become, I presume, more from backroom staff. So you would have, 1 legal department, 1 HR department, rather than them all having individually an accountancy. A number of people are going to be made redundant. That can be very expensive in people who are at a high level. You're not going to get rid of the people low down. It's going to be at high level thinking. So I'm wondering if they're accurate and have been taken into account. And also, particularly for this board, a lot of the work is the implementation, and the costs would include the breaking of contracts. Now, in environment particularly, and to a certain extent transport, a lot of the waste collection services are done by contract. So if they're going to come under one umbrella, are we going to, has that been taken into account, the breaking of contracts and how much that would cost? And while I'm at it, and then I won't ask any more questions this afternoon, is the harmonisation. This again affects this committee quite significantly, this department. Across the county, there are different methods of collecting and sorting and what can be recycled and the method it's done. There are different charges, whether it's for garden waste, whether it's for bulky items. There was a mention made the other day, a question was asked about different people are paying different council tax and it would be harmonised down more than up. So would that be the same principle with our waste collection? Would someone in one area that may be paying £60 a year to have their garden waste collected against someone else that may only be, the district that may only be paying late 30s? How is all that going to be harmonised? And of course the costing of doing that. Sorry that's so long, but then I'll be quiet. Thank you.
Do you answer that then, Declan, I think?
I can start, but you're going to have to remind me on some of that I missed, and I'll obviously defer some to the other people. The first question I think was around sort of the councillor allowances. So all we've done at the moment, obviously, is we're just making working assumptions. And obviously, sort of there's quite a lot of engagement to go through if this was going to go ahead and sort of things get refined. So we've made a working assumption of a basic allowance of £15,000 per councillor, which is obviously higher than the current county council level. And the idea was to reflect the fact that if there's less in total, as it were, there's more responsibilities, and the idea of that would be that allowance would cover things like attendance at the area committee. And Tom knows more on this side of things than me, so I'll let him correct if need be. But on the area committee, I believe the intention was that every single councillor of the unitary authority would attend the area committee for their area, so it'd have that full representation. So it is that sort of focal point almost for the unitary council in that area. So hopefully that would maybe also contribute a bit as well to avoiding some of the confusion that could I think there was concern about sort of having lots of different boards. It would be kind of quite a clean kind of unitary council board, as it were, but it'd have all members on there, and the basic allowance would cover the attendance for that. I think the other side of things that maybe Blake referred to was sort of planning. I'm not sure whether it'd bring in licensing control as well, but obviously it's kind of that local aspect of the planning decisions. In terms of sort of, I suppose, the difference in the loss in savings, the area committees would be very much just sort of a local board. If you compare that to things like the district council, obviously you've got a full organisation with all the infrastructure that goes with it, where the services would still be managed, whether it's sort of on a centrally coordinated basis, as opposed to kind of, it wouldn't be the area committee, it'd have a lot of operations underneath it. So it's, I don't know, a service like myself, again, finance. You might do the finances for all of the area committees, but it'd be fairly small in the scheme of things. You know, I think the gross expenditure of the district councils is something like 170 million. The county councils is 580 million, whereas the area committee, you're talking much smaller amounts. So it's just a different scale. In terms of the implementation costs, redundancy is in there, and we've split it between an estimate of senior managers versus more junior posts. And you're absolutely right. One of the big benefits of this is things like this sort of, at the moment we've got probably 7 or 8 chief execs in Leicestershire. You'd only need one in the future, but they're not cheap people to get rid of. And that dittos all the way down the sort of the hierarchy, as it were. So yeah, redundancy costs are included in there. It is an estimate, because you don't know who's going to go until you get close to the time, but we have increased it from what we normally see on an average basis for the savings initiatives that we do at the moment. In terms of breakage costs of contracts, it's a difficult one in truth, because there's so many contracts involved, both at the county and the district levels. It'd be a big exercise on its own. The thing that plays into giving comfort on that is, if you look at, I don't know, if you take Buckinghamshire as a nearest live example, they received a Minder 2 decision back in March. They only got the actual decision recently, and there's probably another 18 months before actually the new authority's in place. They've probably then got about a 2-3 year period actually when they're making the changes. You can see there's quite an extended period of time where people can start to manage those contracts, so they do start to harmonise a bit more. You will find that you'll get down to a point where there's not every contract that needs to be broken, but you get to the point where you can make the choice. Is it worth breaking the contract and receiving that financial benefit straight away, or actually just hold on and let it run its course naturally and receive the benefits just a little bit later on? So it's a difficult one, because there's a lot of there's some unknowns in there, but it is one where time is on our side in some ways, that you get quite a long implementation period to start to manage those things. In terms of the harmonisation, the council tax is the big headline figure. It's a dominant figure in some way in the finances of both sort of ourselves and the district councils. The harmonisation approach there was just to take the cost of the lowest district council and then just assume you harmonise to that point. So you're effectively sharing the benefits between kind of helping the organisation be more sustainable, but also the sort of most of the council taxpayers in the county as well. Whether you push that through to different services is a bit more difficult, because obviously kind of, I don't know, people like Joe are going to look at, well, how does, or Joe, whoever it is, gets the role, I suppose, has a look at what's the collection arrangements in the county across the whole sort of area, and how do you reconfigure that in the best way? And part of that would be charging, but it's probably too early to say, be my guess at the moment.
Can I just come back on one?
Yes, you can.
May I come back on one point before we move on? Is that you discussed about the 110 basically county councils who would attend the area, that would be part of their duties, would be to attend the area meeting. But you haven't made, how are the area committees made up? Is that through elected representation, and also would they get an allowance as well? Because otherwise you're coming back to a different level. And that's the same when you're coming down to town and parish councils. They're going to be taking on more responsibility. At the moment, I think I'm right in saying, I know I am in the area of where I am, in the Charnwood area. It's very, very hard to get people to become parish councils anyway. The area I'm in, we haven't had an election for parish councils for years. And most of them are being co-opted, which really is not democratic, because you're giving power to people and the residents have had no say in the election of that person. So also, would they be expecting some allowance? I'm not criticising. I think we're looking at all aspects of going forward. Unitary is one of them, but we do need the pros and cons of both sides to look at. I am getting more worried because every time I come to this, I didn't know we were having management boards and town and parish councils and area boards and the council. So we're getting into different layers. So I'm just wondering how area committees would be selected.
No, not yet. We have got a bit of the structure. So can we hold back on that one? I think there is how it's going to be. Thank you. Can we just Dan, you put your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From my understanding, the 110 new councillors would be part of these boards and would have administration and dealing and working with parishes. So probably that would thicken up the whole process. I'm not certain it's massive recruitment of lots of other organisations, to what I understand. The other thing is that one of the huge savings is for the council taxpayer is there's no district bill there anymore. So we were talking about how it could escalate again, but really once it's brought down to the lowest denominator, and then the county would obviously still want to tax, but I don't think, according to what we were told this week, that it wouldn't be at the level and there wouldn't be extra needs that they've taxed and used before for various needs in the service provision. So I don't think it's, I'm just heard the comments and I could just see that it's, once you understand the structure, it's not...
Yeah, I think the problem is, Dan, that we all know that a lot of discussions in some parishes work better than others. Some are co-opted. Some of them don't turn up very often. Some of them are very proactive. I think what before I go to you, Blake, I think we're talking about harmonisation. I think the problem is now with the cat's been out of the bag, there are all sorts of figures flying around. You're obviously aware of that, Declan. People are talking. So we keep hearing the 30 million, which is exactly what Nottingham has said. So it's a figure that seems to crop up. That's been brought up. If we talk about harmonisation, the figure of 8 million is going to cost in a lost council tax. So then we're already down to 22. Do you see? And these are figures that are being abandoned around with lots of members. So I do think to get some strong figures, I know it's crystal balling a little bit as well, and I think that's very important that for scrutiny that we do get some more hard-nosed figures. I'm interested from a commercial point of view, the commercialisation aspect of it. Potentially, how was that affect? Could we be more commercial? Sometimes one organisation is better than lots of small ones, being more commercial, or is it better being lots of small ones? I don't know. I mean, this is a new playing ground. How do we perform commercially? Will it improve that? Do you see what I'm saying? So these are sort of figures financially that I'm interested in. Declan, sorry. It's the beards now.
I was going to say, my beard's nearly catching up, isn't it?
His beard's a lot nicer than yours.
Look, there's a couple of questions about service delivery, particularly in the waste function, and I note that further down the agenda for this afternoon, we've got some time set aside to discuss that. So I won't touch upon that. I just wanted to make myself absolutely clear, Chair, so there's no misunderstanding. My assumption about the potential structure of a unitary and area committees in particular, if we bear in mind, I think it's covered off in paragraph 75 all the way through to paragraph 86, where there's a couple of bars of information about the governance structure. It says that in the case of Leicestershire, the county council, which currently has 55 members, is responsible for 81% of local government expenditure, and the district councils have 254 members, are responsible for 19% of that expenditure. Then it goes on to say the proposal would bring overall councillor numbers down to 110 unitary councillors. Now, underneath that, there would obviously be a central council, the unitary council, but then there would be area committees. The development management boards would essentially be the planning committees, as takes place at a district and borough council at the moment. So my assumption is that the membership of the area committees will be made up of the elected members, the 110 elected members of the proposed unitary council. Yes, there is the potential to co-opt, and I think it's covered off in paragraph 82 where it says each area committee could co-opt additional members as it saw fit, such as town and parish council representatives or business, voluntary sector or statutory partners. And that happens again here at the county council and at borough and district level, as far as my understanding goes. So I wasn't suggesting that there should be separate bodies that each require separate elected representatives to sit on them. It all falls under a single unitary structure, which is made up of within the 110 councillors for that unitary structure. I just wanted to make that clear. That was my understanding.
We've got the next stage, which is the unitary structure, and we're overlapping a bit because this was mainly finance, if I remember right. Is there any other financial? Oh, listen, that finance overview. Is there any other questions? What happens to the district's social housing? What do we do with that financially?
And in some ways, it just follow the same route. We haven't, in terms of sort of housing revenue accounts, things like that, we haven't assumed any benefits. Obviously, they're their own ring-fenced part of the budget, as it were. But you'd assume it'd follow a similar kind of path where you'd look for opportunities where can you strip overheads out by bringing things together. But you'd, as much as you can, you leave that sort of frontline service untouched. So it's kind of, it'd be, I suppose it's just a subdivision of the overall sort of exercise.
Okay. Have you got? Do you want to?
On that very point, Jim.
Okay, David.
I know it's a subdivision of the whole exercise, but you're talking about, I don't know, 4,000 council house tenants in one district and a similar number in another, and there's no harmonisation across districts about the future of council housing. I mean, some authorities have retained their housing stock in-house, others have let them go to a housing association. It's already a hodgepodge, and I've had concerns raised with me is that, because in our area it's an in-house operation and is highly thought of, I think, by the tenants, but the tenants are asking me, does this mean that we're going to be forced, will the council housing be sold without their say-so because it's part of a bigger organisation? So there's lots of questions which are not being addressed now because the districts have now dropped out of the process altogether. So a lot of these questions presumably are just hanging in the air and until this matter moves on. But
can you answer that, Dave? Have you got an idea, Declan? It's a difficult one, this, because
there's no proposal in the, I suppose, the working so far that there be a mass sale of council houses. It's not something that kind of is dependent either way on sort of a unitary structure or not. It being a completely separate decision. So it's nothing to do with this reorganisation.
Can I go to Jonathan Morgan?
Really, just a direct question on that. Out of interest, which of the scrutiny bodies has the issue of council housing come to?
Yeah.
That's the point I was going to make, Chairman. We're looking at the highway service delivery. I know we're having a generic conversation about the model, but this is a specific area, and I was just wondering whether that conversation is more suited to another scrutiny panel.
I can perhaps add on that. There is a section there was an appendix to the Cabinet report, Appendix F, which was, if you like, a sister appendix to this one on environment and transport issues, which is called Economic Growth and Development. And it includes a section within it on property and housing, and that's going to be considered by the Scrutiny Commission at its meeting next week, because economic development falls under the remit of the Commission itself.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the question about council housing brought another one in my mind, actually, and that's about the buildings more generally. So, obviously, each of ourselves here in County Hall and each of the districts and boroughs have their own offices and various other buildings. Would part of the savings be to, in the main, sell those? And obviously, you get the value of the land and so forth. Or would it be envisaged that they'd be kept on by the new unitary authority to make services more accessible to sort of local people? And if the latter, again, this is probably a decision for if this came at a time, but would it be envisaged that the area committees, the planning and so forth, would sit local to the areas to make their planning decisions? So, for instance, planning decisions affecting Charnwood might be in Loughborough, you know, rather than them all being in one central place.
Blake?
Yeah, just on the latter point, I think the report sets out a vision where local committees would deal with planning decisions in a local area unless they were so significant that they cut across, you know, the region, and the council would have to put a mechanism in there to deal with that. Just on the housing issues, I'm just conscious that I've got highly qualified people in terms of highways, environment and waste, and very knowledgeable, who have prepared the reports. The Deputy Chief Executive has said the Scrutiny Commission will be looking at those economic issues such as housing and property, whether those questions could be directed to the Scrutiny Commission when they undertake the scrutiny of that particular aspect of business, if that's okay with you, Chair.
Yeah, obviously you understand there's so much overlapping. I mean, we are transport and environment, but housing and infrastructure is a major part of our concern, of course, which includes housing. Any other questions? Max?
Of housing and buildings, these matters were very much in focus when 1974 Charnwood and Blaby and the other districts were created. I think generally we've done well over it in Charnwood for a long time, selling off Loughborough Borough Council land and Shepshed Urban District land and so on. But these are questions that have been solved efficiently in the past. Forgive me, I know we all had this when we came in the room, and I had mine a little bit earlier. So I've had some questions on the areas that Hilary asked, and I thought that Tom was going to speak on. If Tom's got more to say on that, that's fine, but I've got questions on democracy, and I've got questions on customer service. And we're going to move on. Right. If I just say generally, I'm surprised, well, perhaps I'm not surprised really, that a lot of discussion so far has been about numbers of councillors, numbers of committees, even allowances, and that would be typical and forgivable and so on of an audience of councillors. That's kind of in our focus. I would like us to spend some time focusing on how our customers and residents see things, because they don't see things in the same lens that we do.
I understand, Max. I guess, in all fairness to everybody here, that it was the financial situation. I guess that was the first agenda. We are going to move on. And my next point was: is anything else we'd like to mention financially? Because that's the list we're under. I know it's overlapping, and that's, Max, I understand, but we do see that. I do understand what you're saying, sir. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And there's obviously been already been some discussion on these issues, so I'll be brief. Paragraph 71 to 89 in the Cabinet report set out initial proposals on a possible model unitary structure for Leicestershire, and that will be developed further during the stakeholder engagement period before any public consultation proposals on the proposals, if that were to take place. The proposed model structure is based on a leader and cabinet model of governance, and the model aims to enable unitary councillors to exercise effective strategic and community leadership responsibilities and to allow for effective partnership arrangements. Paragraph 76 refers to analysis which suggests that a council size of 110 members would be in line with other unitary councils in the UK. That's an assumption which is obviously open for discussion and would be tested both through the engagement exercise but also be subject to a boundary commission review should the proposals get to that stage. The diagram in paragraph 86 summarises the model unitary structure and introduces the possible establishment of the area development management subboards and the area committees, which we've already been discussing, and with a diagram setting out the possible responsibilities for those bodies, as well as listing those services which could be devolved to town and parish councils over and above a core county-wide service offer. And I think has been stated, the area development management subboards and area committees would be committees of the council made up of elected unitary councillors. There wouldn't be separate elections to those bodies. Finally, paragraphs 87 to 89 refer to the possible establishment of new town councils for those unparished areas, and summarises the views expressed by town and parish councils in engagement events that have already been undertaken. If I could just to pick up a question that was asked earlier, paragraph 88 refers to parish and town councils taking on extra responsibilities and providing extra services where they request to do that. I think that's an important point to bear in mind, and the proposals are that should powers and responsibilities be devolved to any parish and town councils that request it, that would be accompanied by funding to enable that to happen, and also support from the council to build that council's capacity. So I think that wouldn't necessarily mean that there would be an extra parish council, there would be an increase to our parish council precept if they were to take on those responsibilities. The unitary council would provide the funding alongside those new services. I think that's all I wanted to say about that section. Obviously, happy to take any questions.
Okay, Tom. So we're talking about the structure now. Max, do you want to, and that I'm sure includes democracy, includes what you wanted to mention. So over to you, since you mentioned it.
Yes, confessing that I live in Charnwood and I've been a Charnwood Borough councillor no longer, but it always felt to me, and it continues to, that when we have planning applications brought to us in Charnwood, they may be judged by somebody who lives in Thurmaston or Syston or Birstall or even Anstey near here, which is as far removed from Loughborough as anywhere might be in the county. So the idea of local people determining local issues really, for me, only exists at parish or town council level. Now, I found, like I think a lot of people in the room, this business of management boards, that sends shivers down my spine, the idea of management boards, but I don't know quite what they are yet. We don't know yet, do we? Or area forums, which could be any kind of geography. Much more difficult to get round than parish councils or groups of parish councils even. I think they're referred to as competent parish councils, and certainly town councils, as representing areas that everybody understands and allow people to come on and serve, or what, for a shorter or longer time. It seems to me, even though they're not all elected every year, as perhaps they might not be in Barrow-on-Soar, but they're still very close to the heart of the community. And when I look quite jealously, really, at many villages in the borough and county, some of whom have taken over libraries, I think, well, why couldn't we have one of these in Thorpeacre or Dishley, a kind of area that I live within Loughborough? So that seems to me the root of local democracy, and I'd obviously like to see some of them have powers, but not powers that conflict with other functions. And I remember we had almost a year's discussion between the county council and the borough council, again I'm saying it's Charnwood, about whether we should have cycles going through the marketplace, whether we should change all the signs in the marketplace to be uniform and so on. At the end of that, neither council agreed. So you've got to have some point where decisions are made. But by and large, my experience in local government is consultation, if it's conducted correctly and fairly and in a good spirit, is much the most valuable part of local democracy. Obviously, our councillors have got to be accountable, but I don't hear the demand for councillors to come down and explain what they've done. I hear about consultation. I read things in the press, and that's where and people talk amongst it. That's where democracy takes place. So, in summary, I'm a bit confused by all these management boards and area committees. I'd rather see strong town and parish councils.
Thank you, Max. Jonathan.
So did nobody want to come back on Max's point? No. I was thinking from the front. No.
I think we could go on a bit because it's structure. So if you could, I think it'd be easier to.
Okay, take it all in one go. No, that's fine.
I think it helps the process. We are talking about here the structure. Would be going
Okay.
backwards and forwards.
No,
I
that's
think
fine.
that will clarify because I think the first session, finance was all over the place.
Mr. Chairman, the last thing we want is everyone to be all over the
That's
place.
all right. Okay, afterwards, James.
Actually, talking of all over the place, so the really just looking at the dotty diagram just above item 77, which is actually sort of the measure of population and I think councillors, electorate. And I've seen a similar sort of presentation of unitary sort of authorities spread by population, by geographic area, by acreage, by all sorts of different ways. And it's always quite interesting actually just seeing, I mean, different ways of presenting similar sort of data, but also obviously, you know, as with all these things, you pick your data and you pick your answer. And I guess each one, when presented, tells a slightly different picture and a slightly different tale. What I think, I mean, what's quite interesting would be to actually see that probably without the cities, on the basis that we're clearly a county, not a city. I think that probably for us, I mean, Max, I think, has touched on the sort of sense of identity, and I think the one thing we're not as a county is a Leeds or a Birmingham or a Sheffield or a Manchester or a Bradford. We are of different type and different structure, and it would just, it's a sort of comfort blanket, I guess, actually just sort of getting a feel for where we would fit into that type of comparative structure. There was a comment in the report about, I think, with the County Council network, 25% of members of the County Council network being unitaries. I think, as with all that thing, all those percentages, it's always interesting to see a percentage of what. In other words, how many actually are in actual numbers, and then probably in relative terms, how many of total unitaries are actually counties. Probably another way of looking at it as well. In other words, how do counties actually feature in all of that? In other words, again, you know, how would we fit? You know, what is the best size? What is the best geographic area? I think also partly I'll come on to this later on, but there is an issue about also, and again I think you've touched on it, Mr. Chairman, about the issue about best size for organisations. Bigger can, in theory, mean more efficient. Doesn't necessarily mean better. You know, large organisations sometimes can be impersonal. Small ones can be inefficient. And I think that there is a sliding scale with all of these things, trying to actually work out, ideally, where is that best fit for all the services that we provide to our residents. Max has touched on quite rightly some of the services that may be provided at a much more local level. We've talked about, you know, possibly the creation of intermediary bodies, whether it's an area body, whether it's an area committee, whether it's something that provides that sort of in-between line of how you actually provide those services to residents. What's the best, you know, subsidiarity of what's the best way of delivering a particular service at the right scale, in the right format for residents, for their benefit. It may well be with some of these things that actually a county is too small. And I guess that's where the discussions about strategic alliances have come from, because actually there is an argument for saying that certain things, transport being one, actually it's a much more regional discussion rather than actually even county-based discussion. I already touched on this morning, I'm the last house in Leicestershire, and I'm still very proud of being in Leicestershire, but I have to recognise that you know, Nottinghamshire is literally 20 yards up the road, admittedly a very bad road, but it's very close, and as a result, for even simple journeys, the fact that we actually cross county borders constantly is just a fact of life. So there are certain things that are, as Max touched on, certain things that are probably best delivered at a smaller scale for our residents, and some things which quite naturally, because of what they are, actually outgrow us as a county. So again, that's interesting as far as trying to work out where we should be on that line, because actually depending on the service, depending on the provision, there isn't really an obvious spot to actually put your finger and say, for this particular service, that's the best point to be along that sliding scale. And I suspect that probably if we talk to every single one of those unitaries and we actually talked to every single one of the leaders and service leads, etc., they would probably have a different story as to whether or not they're the right size. John Collins, for instance, in Nottingham, will forever say that 330,000 or whatever Nottingham City is a bloody good size. He likes that. If you probably talk to Peter Tollesby, he'd probably say, "Oh, Leicester, I'd love to have a bit of Birstall or Blaby or something else because I want to be a bit bigger." And each individual, each organisation will actually have a different feel for what is probably the best size for them.
Thank you, Jonathan. Is it James next? Was it? Have I done you? No. And Janice, I'm seeing.
Was I first? Okay, cool. Just a question and a half really on parish councils. I've got 2 hats for district and county, and between the two I've got 8 parishes, which range from really large organised ones with decent numbers of staff, buildings and so forth, down to sort of literally 4 or 5 people that meet, I think, 5 times a year, and everything in between. I was just really, I know you talked about competent parish councils, and that's probably a legal definition of what that means. But in my experience, I've been a parish councillor myself. All councils are only as good as their councillors, but that is especially true of parish and councils. You know, I've seen myself, been on parishes myself, where you have a number of people sort of running with it, and then other people that maybe don't to the same extent, shall we say. So how is it, is there a sort of an objective criteria that says you are always a competent council and you are never a competent council? Is it something they would decide themselves? And if so, would that be decided at the beginning of each year? I've talked about these plans with my parish councils. I do a report to each of them per month. And I've got to say there's a lot of concern, if I'm honest with you, from them that what they don't want is, from their point of view, to sort of us coming along and dumping a load of responsibility on them that they don't want. So it's important that we recognise they are volunteers. Obviously, it's their free time. But equally, I'm mindful of the fact that we don't want to create a 2-tier parish system whereby you got one that's up here and another one that's got no responsibilities, because then you might get people then questioning why is it they can decide their own applications and we can't, and so forth. So really, as I say, that's sort of my comment, question, if you like, around sort of how that's decided and what constitutes a competent parish council.
Thank you, James. Thank you. Janice. Thanks to make you jump there.
I didn't know it was my turn. Yeah, mine is just a comment that I find it difficult that the MPs and districts have taken a decision so quickly without consulting the people that they serve. And dropping out of the discussions mean that they will not have any input into the structure of a unitary. So I find that really, really disappointing that it's come to that without even forging a way forward to find exactly whether it would be any good for the people of Leicestershire or not. Thank you.
Okay, over to you, David.
Quickly, Chairman, Jonathan raised an interesting point about people living on towards the edge of the county. We've got that situation in the southwest where we're very much associated with the West Midlands already through our proximity to all the services that are provided in the Nuneaton and Coventry area. So it does make you wonder whether we should be looking quite so rigidly at the county boundaries, and we should just be aware of the influences all around us which impact upon ourselves all the time. Just to some extent, we're looking at this report, which has been drawn up by the officers to argue the case, and they argue a good case. But there are all sorts of other things happening at the same time, which we ought to be aware of. We've touched on social housing and housing generally, which is not mentioned in this report and which might be mentioned next week at the Scrutiny Commission.
where we're not getting any, where there's no input at the moment from districts because they're not engaged with this process. But one aspect which is of increasing concern to me is on the where we start to look at the top of page 86. We start to look at a single planning authority, strategic planning for the area as a whole. I think we face a crisis in planning because increasingly decisions are being taken not by ourselves but by the government or by a government agency. I mean, I've got this report in front of me still, which is I'm trying to make sense of, and this has been drawn up not by this county council, and the district councils might have had input into it, but I very much hope that the county council has not endorsed this report, because for one thing, they can't spell Hinckley. Now, if yourselves as our leading experts who must have gone through this with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that every aspect of this report is tickety-boo, it would be helpful if you could spell the name of our second town correctly. Sorry, I'm not being facetious, but it just when you see the name of your own town in a report spelt wrong, it's as good as having your own name spelt wrong. You realise that the person who has written it hasn't a clue what they're talking about. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, but it does matter because this is now sitting in front of the minister for whatever it is. That minister is making a decision on behalf of this county, and we're talking about planning as if we've got some say in it, and all the time, of course, decisions are being taken not by ourselves, but by the planning inspectorate. The planning inspectorate is now being given responsibility for all major decisions, so we have less say in it, and we're now being told that if, as district councils, there are developers around who do not actually build the houses that they've been given authority to build, planning consent to build, local authorities are going to be penalised as a result. And so there's this kind of, the government is gradually taking everything over anyway, and we're just talking about how to restructure ourselves here. There's so many serious things going on which ought to be addressed by somebody, and I do wonder whether we're addressing the right questions in this exercise.
Okay, Dave. I can see your point. I'm surprised I didn't see that. That I've not.
Just ask a question, because Mr. Bill's got this document. I've not seen the document.
No,
so
it's only just been. It's not been. Not all of us. It's not. It's not for this meeting.
Why haven't we got one? Why haven't we?
It's not for this meeting. It's not been. It's not been released. There's only. There'll be copies. Everybody will get them, but it's not been released properly.
It's just that Mr. Bill's talking about this document, and I
That's
don't
okay,
know what
Janice.
it's on about. So.
Yes, Blake.
Just to pick up on a few of the issues that have been raised, on the Midlands Connect document that's just been referred to, that got published yesterday. And I checked my email inbox before attending this meeting, and I think the scrutiny panel members have been sent a copy as a courtesy. It's not to be discussed today because obviously not even I've had an opportunity. I haven't had an opportunity to look at the document in some detail myself. But it is the Midlands Connect work, and I think Mr. Bull raises a relevant point there. This is how do we interact? It's a fact of life that we're having to interact with regional bodies now. The government have set LEPs up, they've set, the Northern Powerhouse is motoring, we've got the Midlands Engine, and how do we engage with these big bodies that are backed up with influential powers and money? And a part of what we're discussing today about us as councillors, how do we best put ourselves in the best position to do that? And I accept it's a moot point, but this is why we need the debate about our future structure. Can I just come back on the parish council issue, because I found that really interesting, and it's a really good point. what I understand, parish councils are optional. I mean, in London and Leicester, they don't have parish councils. Indeed, in the Harbour district, a district that I know obviously very well, Harborough itself doesn't have a town council, but Lutterworth does. And it always bemuses me that people in Lutterworth think Harborough get a better deal in spite of them not actually having a town council. So there may be a question mark about the delivery of town councils, but again, you know, they can add real value, in my opinion. Parish councils, if they're operated and run properly, can add real value. I don't think there's a suggestion that every area should have one, especially if they don't want one, but I think if they're supported properly with the right powers and they have the right training and insights and general support, they can add real value to the local community, and they could underpin any structure that we may or may not decide to progress. The final point I'd mention is Janice, I think she made a good point about MPs already declaring their position and leaders of councils already declaring their position. But I think we need to remind ourselves we haven't made a decision yet. This is a part of the process. So, you know, for us to, as a council, as a county council, get to a position where we make a decision about this, we need to undertake this debate we're having. We need to explore the detail. You know, whether that be the structure of a unitary or what will underpin it in the future or what its output would look like. And I think that's healthy for us to be doing that exercise right now. Thanks.
Okay, that's a structure. I was going to ask can I ask a few questions? Okay. What I would like, I'm very already passionate because some of you know what I do and what I don't do. I am a scientist, but more of a human performance scientist, but I'm very enamoured by figures and performance. So what I would like to do is I'd like to see provided, and hopefully this is what this is for, to explore some academic responses and studies in regard to the adoption of unitary. I'd like that. I'd like some reports. I've read some, but I won't say much. I just think, could we get a little bit more information? As part of the task group, I've asked that, and we've asked we will follow. I'm on the task group. It'd be interesting to see other people's point of view. The important thing is, what impact will it have on democracy, on local democracy? Because Max has mentioned it. We're talking about parish. So what we are talking about, everybody, is the structure fit for purpose for local democracy. Is that correct? Because that's what we're here for. We're here. I get voted by Mrs. Smith around the corner, who makes me a cup of tea. Terrible, soggy biscuits, but I still go in. So it's still, and that's what we're all about. We're all about people, everybody. So we're here trying to get the best structure, and I know this council is passionate about that, getting the right structure and providing the best service. And we do get mixed in, of course, with finance because we need money to do that. But I'd like to see some academic reports, how and what, and other reports from unitary bodies and non-unitary. Well, it has to be unitary, and you know, how has the service been improved or hasn't it? Where is the weaknesses? Where are the strengths? So we don't make mistakes. And I think if because we are being told a number of groups, I think some 20-odd% have gone to unitary, some haven't. There's different structures. My experience is when I go to Birmingham, I know some of the unitary structures aren't working very well. Some are. We need to know why. What's the difference? So we don't make the mistakes. So I guess these sort of the things I would like to be reported. So when we further go down, it's exactly what we do in this committee. We do it very well about roads, about dressings, about trying to prevent and trying to do the best things to prevent complaints. Does that make sense, Declan, as well? I'm sure there'll be something financing that, but also in the structure that we do it right. The other issue is, for me, is comparing roles. Not all districts work the same, do they? We are different. We do things bad, we do some poorly. So, and you know, and let's be honest, nothing's perfect. So how the roles will change and how those roles will be taken over by the unitary, where the good strengths will be adopted, where the ones will be, you know, not taken on. So those sort of things. And that, to me, that's the structure side of it. I just like some information on that for future guidance, that's all. Because I know for me, this is the first step, and the first step means we gain more information to make us confident to make the decisions to move forward. Over to you, Bill.
Thank you. An option to be controversial, of course. However, whatever we do, we're still a donut. And the city sits in the middle. And that's not been considered. I'm a bit concerned that the options haven't been put before us. There's only 2 options put before us. Also been mentioned this afternoon, you know, we've got Nottinghamshire, few yards away from our border. We've got Warwickshire. One argument would be to abolish the county and make one area of Leicestershire, Warwickshire and Nottinghamshire and devolve powers to the districts. That option is not before us. I don't know if it's an option, what the savings would be or not, but it's not there as an option. It ought to be there as an option. If we're looking at options for our residents, which I'm looking at for our residents, they should have opportunity to look at all options. Which to bring the city back in here like it was years ago, and options not before us. So we're very limited number of options we're looking at. So why have we only picked on these options? And the other question, of course, is to ask is, at the present time, how long can the county carry on as it is? That question I ask because nobody's ever told me the answer how long we can carry on for as we are. And that's a crucial thing.
Okay, I guess you guys can answer, but it's, again, are you talking structure, the current structure, can it carry on as it is? Well, I think what we're trying to do is make a change, though. Bill, I mean, part of...
How long can we carry on as we are?
Okay. We go to Blake first.
Okay, two points there. How long can we carry on as we are? We've had a financial briefing, so one of the key drivers for why we're looking at this is the finances of the authority going forward, and we've identified what we've saved. I think it's been suggested, although there'll be obviously a net saving of around 30 million a year, there comes a certain point on our current system where we'll have deficits of 10 plus million a year, and it's been suggested, and I think it's in the report, that simply is not sustainable. Hence, we're looking at this now. We've got ourselves to the back of the queue. We're not in Northamptonshire's position, thank goodness, but we really do need to consider what our options are in the future, because the best advice we're getting from the professional officers is, the deficits won't be sustainable, which is therefore the driver for looking at this today. In terms of the wider area, I should imagine any proposals have got to be coterminous with what else is going on at the moment with regards to LEPs and economic development policy making. I'd suggest, whilst there is a big case to collaborate and work with through a strategic alliance with our other councils in the East Midlands, to form a single council. I mean, I'm not an expert in this, but you're talking millions of population, and I just don't think that's deliverable or viable. I don't think there's an example of that in the country. I'm not sure what population Birmingham has, but I would imagine with Nottinghamshire, Lincolnshire, perhaps Derbyshire ourselves, you'd be talking well in excess of Birmingham's population. I'm not sure that's something that any government would be prepared to consider. That's my view.
Dan?
I believe there's a minimum. I don't quite know that number. But what I do know is it has to be a natural body, has to be a natural area. The government won't allow you to add bits on to create other things. It has to be a natural area. So we as Leicestershire County Council has a defined border. We have somebody in the middle who's a unitary authority, but they already are a unitary authority. I understand the debate is about Leicestershire, not the city. So we're restricted by government, by legislation. It has to be normal, natural boundaries. You can't make it artificial. So I think that's the first point. The second is where we are with the cities, where we are. And they're a unitary authority and they're very happy to be that. And as you heard earlier from Jonathan, perhaps they'd like to grab a bit of our area if they could. So I don't think, making it within reason, within the confines, so we couldn't go this super duper. But what we can do as a unitary authority is have more clout at the table with other organisations or unitary authorities to create a better and a more prosperous East Midlands, as opposed, because you've brought up, Mr Bolter, about working against. We've got the West Midlands that are taking 70% of the pie at the moment. You can see that they are getting all the funding because we're not organised. They're winning every game. We're not even in the game yet until we get our act together, till we've got proper sound structures and we can work with other people to create a positive and an enabling format that can actually go forward. So I think really we are where we are with the county. The donut is the donut and we're left with it, and we can't do much about that, but we can, by moving ourselves and by doing work ourselves, and enhance our own position.
Just quick answer. We do have to be careful because Leicester is a unitary mayor-led. This is not what we are suggesting here. You're obviously aware of that.
Yeah.
That is different. I have my debate, my concerns about a mayor-led unitary. We just have to look at some of the results of the education in Leicester, which is some of the worst in the country. Secondly, the West, we have to also take into account location. We've got Bottesford, we've got areas of Leicestershire that are nearer to Grantham, nearer to the other east side. So we must really not forget about our geographical. We have got some isolated areas. The West is a corridor with the M1. I do think we need to be careful of looking at geographically where we're placed. Jonathan.
I was really just going to support some of the comments that Blake made in explanation. So one of my understandings is that within the paper, I think it sets out 3 types of creation of unitary, 1, 2 and 3, 1 being county proposal, 2 being 2 or more districts, and then 3 being beyond that area. My understanding is that 3 is actually no longer possible because the PCC legislation required unitaries to actually be coterminous with, or any authorities to be coterminous with the PCC boundary. So actually you can't go out of your PCC boundary to, so one of the points, for instance, with Rutland is that Rutland actually has been talking across boundaries elsewhere. They can't because their PCC boundaries are actually with ours. So the government legislation is quite clear about what's allowed and what isn't allowed. The only other issue, Dan, you touched on about sizes. I mean, again, the paper, I think it sort of references the 300,000 and a bit. And I think the paper helps to sort of flesh that out as being possibly 5%, 10% over as being the government's target. So it's certainly, it's unlike Bucks, for instance, which was always going to be way too small to be 2. The government sort of set limits, I guess. Nobody really knows precisely, but it's probably 330 if you assume 110% of 300, and anywhere north of that, and I guess all the way up to the Birminghams, which are 1 million and a bit, which I think, Chair, as you touched on, there are some problems, children's services being a particular one, which are considered to be failing in Birmingham, and clearly we don't want to, and certainly are not in that position. So I think there are, as all these things, parameters sort of come out, and I think it's quite interesting the more when you actually dig into the details. And then obviously, as has been touched on, we've got the issue of what happens beyond March next year, which again is a bit of a mystery at the moment, and that's going to be interesting to see what comes next.
Bill?
Just to come back, Chair, as it's not going to happen anyway, because the government minister's against what you're doing at the moment, what I'm talking about is possibility of sneak in the future, not this next time round, but we've got to think longer term, and that's why I brought it up, because we've already been told this is not going to happen in this Parliament, possibly the next. It's ones after that we've got to think about.
Okay, Bill, I think, 2 seconds already. We're going
Very
through...
quick one, Chairman. I swear I'm not going to wax on. My understanding is, I know the MPs have written into the council saying, they've spoken to the Secretary of State and they've spoken to leaders of district councils, and they've never seen a deader duck. I paraphrase. But I'm not sure the County Council has formal correspondence from the Secretary of State or any of their ministers to that effect. So there is a representation from a group of stakeholders, but there is no formal communique between the government and the County Council to come to that conclusion. That's my understanding.
I've got to answer that. I think we're in a process. I think we've agreed at the beginning of this meeting fairly. We understand that there's some issues outside, but let's go with the process. We're here now. We're here this afternoon, and then we continue on the process. Does that answer for you, there, Dan? Is that all right? I think we agreed to do the process. We may find it interesting. I'm finding some things interesting. I think there's going to be some challenges, learning along the way. I think if we take it with that, then we will get somewhere, and I think that's important. Let's go to the next stage of the agenda. Does anybody, Tom, anything to comment until we move on?
I can perhaps just come back on a couple of things quickly that have been...
I'd appreciate that. Thank you very much, Tom.
In the discussion. Reference was made, I think it was by Mr Hunter earlier, about some confusion about the roles of parish councils, local area committees and the area development management sub-boards. I mean, I think what the proposals seek to do is achieve a balance between the financial and service integration benefits of having a larger council. You know, those come from things like economies of scale, but also recognising the value of local decision making and delivery for some issues. And those proposals are sort of built up on the fact that we do have parish and town councils across large parts of the county, and that some of those councils are able and willing to take on additional responsibilities, but there are others that, as Mr. Poland said, that are less, don't want to do that, or perhaps don't have the capacity or capability to do that. So there's an opportunity there to for some parish councils to take on more responsibilities, and the new council it's envisaged would be able to support them to do that. What local area committees would do is enable across the whole county for some local decision making to be taken, which would provide that provision across the whole county, and the sorts of things that might be done in relation to that are set out in the report. And of course, the area development management subboards need to be a separate thing because of the specific requirements around planning activities, and one of their principal responsibilities would be to decide planning applications that weren't delegated to officers. So I think that's the rationale for that structure. Mr. Morgan referred to the diagram above paragraph 77, the one that sort of the dots with the line through it. And I think what that diagram is intended to show is that the proposed number of councillors for the size of the council is consistent with other unitary councils, given their size. I think the question about what the ideal size of a unitary council would be is clearly a matter of some subjectivity and judgment. But I think there are two things perhaps to bear in mind. One is the government guidance about unitary councils needed to be substantially above 350,000 people in size. And perhaps the other thing to note is that the Working Party did agree. I thought I'd have to. I can't remember. Is it 300,000? Sorry, I misquoted there. So substantially above 300,000. And then the other point is that the Working Party that Mr. Pearson referred to earlier has asked for a piece of work to be done to look at the relationship between size of unitary authorities and their financial viability, and Declan will be looking at that ahead of one of the future meetings.
Thanks for that, because there is the task force doing a lot of work, and that's started, so people are beaving away there as well, which I think is very good, which will provide a great deal of information to this process. Can we move on to the next stage? Yes, Janice.
Thank you. Thank you. It's referring to town and parish councils, and I think with help and support, as you touched on, some councils will probably want to take on more, but local councillors come and go quite quickly. So to actually get a town council understanding of what they can do, and if they can take on more responsibility with help and support, is which is good for local democracy, because they're at the heart of what they're seeing in their local areas, but obviously they probably would need more local support. So I think that's touched on that, and when we know more about it, then they will get to hear more about how it would work. Thank you.
Yeah, that's always interesting. I guess from a Melton point of view, sometimes we have a very Melton town vision, and I'm sure Byron sitting in the back there also will say there's very much a rural vision. The art of it is bringing it together and working together for everybody, and I'm sure you agree with that. Okay, thank you. Can we get to the next agenda item? And that's agenda item 4. We've touched a lot of this already, by the way. Would any questions on that? Thank you.
Just a very quick introduction, shall I?
It's always nice to see you produce things, Tom. Go for it.
So paragraphs 112 to 129 of the report set out the initial appraisal of the two options which Cabinet asked officers to look at. A financial assessment is set out, and that makes clear the estimated implementation cost and savings for the two options, with paragraphs 116, 117 and 118 going into some detail regarding how those costs and savings have been identified, and clearly you spoke a little bit about those earlier. Paragraphs 123 to 125 summarise the beneficiaries of the identified savings, stating that the majority of savings will go towards ensuring the ongoing sustainability of services, so protecting services from further reductions, but that in addition the harmonisation of council tax across the county as well as investment in service improvement could be accommodated too. The non-financial assessment is drawn together in the table included at paragraph 129, and that table analyses the pros and cons of both options against the government's criteria for the establishment of a unitary structure. There's a lot of information in that, so I don't plan to go through that now, but obviously happy to answer any questions that you might have on it.
Thank you, Tom. Questions, please. Covered quite a bit of that on the overlapping area, but Jonathan, over to you.
I'll start with a straightforward one. So the table above 119, I think is probably the interesting one, because that's obviously the split of where potential savings may possibly come, and substantially most of the savings would actually come from back office, with some admin and senior management added to the top of that, and that's probably consistent by the looks of it with whether it's single or two. And I'm assuming that certainly some of the back office ones are ones that have already been roughly identified as to sort of the rough areas, and so rather than being senior management, they are general staff. And I was just wondering what sort of areas you would sort of imagine they were going to be, in sort of amalgamation of particular areas.
Yep. In terms of that first comment, that's right. So the senior management is very crudely sort of anybody over 50,000. So it's kind of that kind of organisational management structure has been sort of moved out there, where the back office is kind of more the kind of the actual operations of those sort of back office services, and it cuts across all the different services. You've got obviously sort of the big ones tend to be IT and property, but also services like yourself, like ourselves in sort of finance, HR, legal tend to be significant as well. So it's a lot of the savings within the back office tend to come down from the by organisations being in existence. There's certain activities that have to take place. If you consolidate that down, whether it's to two organisations or one organisation, you make that saving. So again, using finance as an example, I touched on it before, the statutory accounts is quite a clean one that kind of, if you folded all the organisations into one, you'd hardly need any extra resource to perform the statutory accounts, but you'd save the work that was previously done in seven authorities. Ditto, that's done on a computer system, sort of called an ERP, that does the accounts payable, accounts receivable, etc. Again, it'd be sort of quite a small expansion of that technology for, a number more users, but not necessarily making them more complex. You don't need new systems to do it. So you save all those sort of other systems that can now be sort of switched off. So it tends to be that replication through the different services. You could say the same with HR and kind of you'll need one set of organisational policies, the liaison, the communication, etc. So it tends to be that sort of replication through structure. But it very much is, if you wanted the key driver, it's about organisational existence. Less organisations, less overhead to manage them.
One quick follow-up in that case. So the three sort of significant elements on staffing, so senior management, back office, and support. I mean, that feels roughly about 1,000 FTE individuals. And what is that over a total headcount for all of the districts and the county added together?
don't have the actual FTE to hand, but it's somewhere in the region of sort of, I think it's about 5,000. I'm just looking down at Tom whether he's got the number, but don't have it. But the actual sort of saving in terms of sort of FTE would be sort of it'd be less than half of 1,000. It's probably nearer the kind of the I don't know. My guess would be about sort of the 400. It obviously depends on who goes, the mix of what sort of salary it is at the time. But obviously, kind of not all those costs are staffing costs, and obviously, kind of when you also say things like the pension and NI, so it does tend to be less than you initially kind of sometimes when you work these through. But if you wanted to figure, it's kind of probably nearer that sort of 400-ish sort of mark.
Declan, can I ask a question? I'm not sure this is the case. Are the LCC structure and payments to the staff here at a high level or a number of levels, is that at a higher level than we would normally pay district staff? Have we got a percentage, etc.? You know, I mean, are staff here paid more in similar positions than ones in district?
And I don't have a percentage, but the simple answer is yes. If you look kind of even from sort of the chief exec down, just by the sheer scale of the organisation, you do tend to just have to offer more money to do something that may be a similar job description, but it just covers a bigger area, hence it may have more sort of responsibilities in it. And you do tend to see that sort of top to bottom of the organisation. It does fade away a bit when you get more into kind of, I don't know, if we were paying somebody on the more operational levels, it tends to equalise at that level, but on their management structures, because you've got more responsibilities, you tend to pay more.
I guess in the task force we could be asking comparisons of cost, comparisons of positions, how that would impact on savings, of course, because the reason why we're doing this is to be more cost efficient.
No, absolutely, undoubtedly there is going to be a bit of a, and you will can see it through some of the figures that kind of you might have sort of, you've got less people relative to the size of the organisation in the county, but on a per person basis they tend to get paid a bit more than they do in the district. So the trick is to make sure that if the organisation goes up, the number of people goes up at a slower rate than the salaries, and that tends to be, fairly sort of well-worn path in most sort of organisation kind of mergers, acquisitions. If you looked outside the public sector, is something they tend to gain from.
I guess some of the questions we will be asked, or the districts would ask, well, if I've got a similar person to a similar member of the LCC earning less money that actually qualified for the job, could they apply for it if there's going to be the redundancy? Well, I know. I mean, we're sitting here comfortable that we want to be the main leaders of this, but we have got people that potentially could be made redundant, which is never very pleasant, as you're aware of that. I just wonder how we look at that, about competencies and how that fits into the future role of a unitary. If that makes sense, anyway.
My understanding is one thing that government's pushed in the past, and obviously things vary, so don't hold me to this, is that they're at pains that it's not sort of seen as a sort of takeover, and it isn't a takeover in actuality, that you should get the best of all the talent, as it were. So that kind of, I know in the past the government has pushed and forced the kind of that transition to ensure that there is open competition, because otherwise you shoot yourself in the foot a little bit. We do struggle as an organisation to recruit, so if you've got a bigger sort of resource pool to recruit from, you should try and make the most of that. So.
Good, because obviously in any structural change, if we talk that and we're passionate about that, that makes transition a little bit easier, doesn't it? Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Move on to number 5, services and unitary structure. Anne.
Afternoon.
This meeting has been, we've been nearly 2 hours in. You haven't spoke, I can't believe it.
It's not like me, is it?
Over to you, Anne.
Right, I'll endeavour to be brief because time is marching on. The appendix, I'll take you briefly through the appendix to the report, which looks at some of the opportunities that a unitary structure could potentially offer to E&T services. And as we've already heard this morning, or this afternoon, sorry, obviously there's a whole host of other services impacted, and some services that the County Council don't do that we're not looking at. We're particularly looking at and focusing just on E&T services this afternoon. There's lots of possible examples we could have included in this appendix, but we chose to look at two areas to begin to give you a feel of how some services could operate under a unitary type structure. I just want to emphasise at the outset, we haven't done any detailed work on this. This has been compiled simply from our own knowledge and looking at other existing unitary councils. There's no detailed work behind it, so I just want to caveat it at the beginning. Just as a reminder, what we do at the moment, our current services as the county. On the highways and transport side of the department, we are the highway authority. So that covers all functions from securing funding for the big bits of infrastructure, major scheme delivery, highway maintenance, which we had a good discussion about earlier today, school, SEN transport, road safety, traffic management, concessionary travel, blue badges, traffic modelling, data collection, a whole host of functions in there. On the environment and waste side of the department, we are responsible for disposing of the county's waste. We run the 14 recycling and household waste sites, as well as directing the council's environmental activity. Many of our functions are discrete to the county. You know, they aren't overlapped, there's no duplication. However, for a number of key areas, we need to work with the district authorities to ensure that the residents and businesses get that end-to-end service. Examples are waste collection and disposal, planning consents, obviously sit with the district authority as the planning authority, but need to take account of views of highways as a statutory consultee, and also lead local flood authority, as well as some other county council functions that don't sit within this department. In effect, each body has to provide its bit of the service, and sometimes, to be fair, I think we'll all acknowledge there can be a lack of clarity or a clear rationale for the way things are split at the moment from maybe the public's perspective. For some functions, we provide very similar services to the districts. One example would be we cut highway grass. Districts obviously cut grass in their own parks, etc. So there's similar functions provided, although on different geographic areas. Some benefits of unitary are set out at the top of page 104 in that appendix, and they will be common across many service areas, and we've already touched on some of those as part of the discussion already. Reducing the back office costs, clarity for residents and providing who provides the service, consistency of service level, potential economies of scale through procurements, and that's not just, say, for instance, across 7 districts as one procurement, but obviously, again, as mentioned earlier, that end-to-end service, the bit that covers what perhaps the district does at the moment and the county. An ability to deliver on policy. Examples on that, parking, and I'll come on to that in a wee bit more detail, but also things like recycling. We, as a disposal authority, end up with the cost of dealing with recycling and levels of contamination, which is a cost to us. However, the responsibility for collecting the recycling and therefore advising on what can be recycled and working with residents to ensure a level of compliance sits with the districts. There are also a number of service-specific benefits when you get into looking at each service activity across many of the activities we do in E&T, and I'll come on to that again in a couple of minutes. We did look, the report also sets out some other unitaries and what they do in terms of some of the functions we provide at the moment. You'll see there in the report, Durham, for instance, one of the things they did is they created a one-stop shop around development by locating together and having very close coordination across transport, economic development, housing and planning functions. So in terms of both the business sector, the development sector, and working with one authority across all those things and delivering growth, you could see potentially there could be benefits there. Wiltshire saw a reduction on CO2 emissions by rationalising their buildings. And again, I think that was a question that was raised by Mr. Poland. We would envisage, and particularly as well this is wider than just environment and transport, but for our areas, we have depots for highways, we have the recycling and household waste sites, etc. We would want to look at rationalising those buildings, what we would best need to deliver the services holistically across the area. Wiltshire's experience was they saw a reduction in CO2 emissions as a result of rationalising the buildings that they required. They also saw a reduction in waste to landfill and created area boards that had the ability to agree themselves on highway improvements for their area. So that was done at the local level, which I think, you know, we've touched on in terms of those area committees. And overall, they saw an 18% customer satisfaction increase in the first 2 years of their operation. We go on to, in the appendix, just pick 2 particular case studies because, you know, as I say, there's an awful lot of things we could have, you know, put in there to discuss to give you a flavour. However, the ones we've picked are, firstly, waste. The current regime, as I'm sure you're all fully aware, the 7 districts are the waste collection authorities. Now, again, I'm sure you probably appreciate each of those has a different regime in how they do that. Now, we have included an appendix there. It's one of these, the one at the very back, and it pulls out, and it gives you a flavour of the different regimes they have in terms of down to the basics of the type of collection container, whether it's bin, colours, whether it's a bag, etc., etc. Different frequencies, whether it's weekly, fortnightly, etc., etc. Different materials and different instructions about what to do with those materials and different charges. And again, I think that was alluded to earlier, for instance, harmonisation of charging for things like green waste. Obviously, with that, there's 7 different procurement regimes, and again, we touched on this earlier with, you know, how do we deal with contracts when they end at different dates? And, you know, there's a huge amount of potential there, but ultimately, 7 different procurement regimes, you know, therefore you likely got an element of inefficiency in terms of cost of doing those 7 times and the officer time involved in carrying out 7 exercises as opposed to potentially 1 exercise. Under a unitary scenario, you could have 1 collection policy and regime across the district. Now, while you say, okay, as a resident of one district, I know my regime, etc., you know, we do find instances, and I'm sure many of you who are district or borough council representatives will be aware as well, where people do get confused between authorities. Either they move house, they have relatives or friends who live in a different area. Those conversations can lead to some confusion. 1 procurement exercise, we've talked about that one. Greater clarity for the customer, a single point of contact, which compares to 9 at the moment. Now, the 9 are the 7 districts. Ourselves as a waste disposal authority, because to be fair, not everybody out there understands that the districts are the collection and we as the county are the disposal authority. And also we have a waste partnership, which comprises all of those 8 authorities, but it has a website as well, so there's another point of contact just to add to confusion. Just to give you a bit of an idea, we've included the table under paragraph 21 there shows Durham's offer in terms of waste, you know, 1 offer across the county there, just to give you an idea. A whole system approach to waste potentially offers you the value for money through that procurement, depot rationalisation, optimising collection rounds across the county and not just being beholden to various, you know, to district boundaries, etc. The potential to integrate with other functions such as litter, fly tipping, enforcement, and also a greater opportunity to affect behaviour. And, you know, I provided that example earlier about recycling and incentivising the incentive to actually drive behaviour in the right direction. Overall, the customer benefits from, you know, a coordinated, holistic approach, as well as ultimately what you'd be aiming to achieve as well is those cost savings through efficiency. The second example we've picked was on the highways and transport side is in parking. Now, the current regime, just to remind you, because it is quite confusing, I'm the first person who's worked in highways and transport for years to admit this is quite confusing for people. Districts are responsible for off-street parking, and the county council is responsible for the on-street parking, including residence parking, and also the traffic management functions, i.e. the traffic regulation orders to effect what the parking regime will be on street. In Leicestershire, through a parking board which comprises of the 7 districts and the county has delegated its enforcement function to the districts. So the districts actually carry out the enforcement of all parking on street and off street on behalf of ourselves. What we then do for the whole of all those 8 authorities as a county is provide the notice processing function, and in layman's terms that means we deal with the process around, you know, when you're issued with a parking ticket. Charging. Now charging again, that's one of the similar things to waste collection in terms of varying regimes across the districts, because the county does not charge for on-street parking at all anywhere in the county, and we've no plans to. Just to emphasise that one, please, Mr. Bolter.
We never have.
Yeah, thank you. However, 6 of the 7 districts do charge for off-street parking, but there's different charging regimes there as well. Obviously, different charges depending on where you're parking, which district you're parking in. Again, you know, I would maintain that would be confusing for the public, not only on, you know, how does it operate here, but also who to contact. Who do I contact if I've got an issue about my parking? You know, they could phone the county quite easily, you know, thinking it would be us, and we'll say, sorry, it's the off-street parking, it's the district authority, etc. So, you know, it's not a simple mechanism by any means. A unitary option would give you the potential of controlling both on-street and off-street parking, and that would enable you to implement a policy that best supports efficient highway movement, as well as supporting your local town centres in terms of the economy, etc. One of the issues we've found often before is, while you could have, or as the highway authority, we can have a policy around parking and, for instance, demand management and supporting travel by bus, etc. Unless, as the districts as the planning authority, are working in close alignment to that. For instance, planning decisions to allow off-street parking in the middle of a town can undermine delivering on your parking policy. So it's about that coordination and the challenges of coordinating under a 2-tier system. It would be, under the unitaries, potentially much easier for the public with one authority to contact, one regime. There would be efficiencies in terms of maximising the civil enforcement officers in terms of, again, you don't have boundary restrictions and where you're activating those, and potentially widening their functions to include things like, you know, identifying highway defects, so taking on some of the highway inspectors' roles. So if they notice things, for instance, the street light's not working, they could then call that in and register, and we're not relying on an inspector to go out there maybe at a different time later on. There are many other examples we could have put in here for across the E&T functions, where unitary could potentially provide benefits through better service integration. Just off the top of my head, things like, particularly prevalent in the recent weeks for me, fly tipping on the highway, planning process and the growth agenda, air quality. Mr. Hunt previously mentioned challenges of, you know, implementing a traffic regulation order for cycling through a town centre. You know, the list goes on. There's an awful lot of opportunities there under potential unitary structure. However, the report, you know, has detailed those 2 examples for you, and hopefully it's given you a feel of the type of opportunities there could be for E&T services.
Thank you, Anne. I think just to mention on parking, I think we have to take into account also the NCP, private parking, pub parking, because that adds confusion. We've had some nightmares in Melton with co-op parking, which is next door to our parking, and people have got caught out. So, you know, so we do it. Parking generally throughout the country is different. There's private, etc. So it is a confusing issue. Max?
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks, Anne. I found that very informative, but very much sort of from the officer point of view, looking out. All these savings can be made, and hey, it's going to be better for the, you know, for the public, and I fully go along with that. I think I would just say that I think this authority does customer service better than any organisation, private or public, that I know. And I think that's partly down to the democracy, actually, that members have, not necessarily you guys, but have pushed the authority to getting better and better at that customer service. I just want to say that before I say what I really wanted to say, which was... it's just a preface. Now, where was I? that's right. I'm good at that. Yeah, I just wanted to put a few examples of where what's important for me is the importance of the service and improving the service. I'm going to get beaten up or not, depending upon the quality of the service. Actually, people don't like paying their council tax bills, but they never quite see that connection between what we've been talking about, saving £30 million a year or whatever it may be, against the quality of the service. So we've mentioned grass cutting. We mentioned I think we mentioned gritting. In my town, you have to ask the borough council for a gritting box, and they have to ask the county council if they'll supply one, and then hopefully they'll go. But that shouldn't really be necessary. We've got all sorts of different the same services provided by different people, including the private sector. I have to say that parking, grass cutting, and so on, often falls to developers or the successors of developers, as you said, Chair. But in my experience of this, and it's quite substantial, the county council has got this nailed. I found patches of grass that nobody will lay claim to. Borough council comes in, not ours. The county council says, not ours. And I said, well, whose is it? County council say, oh, well, we looked it up, and it belongs to the developer. So you do need a highly skilled and qualified authority to solve these interfaces between private sector enterprises or property. And I certainly found that the local district authority in my area has not been up to that and not all capable of doing that job. So the package of skills that we've got at the county council can offer a better service across the services that we've been offering. And I just wanted to finish by just quite a simple example which I always think about when we talk about services. And that is that in my patch we have a footpath, it's a shared cycle path, it's always been maintained by the borough council who sweep the leaves and that kind of thing. And I met a person who was a nurse at the local urgent care centre, and she rang me up and said, they've just told me to phone you because I've had an accident on the path and cut myself very badly, and I wanted to explain why I tripped over because there's a piece of metal in the path. And I phoned the borough council because that's where you always phone first. And they told me to phone the county because it's the county. And they phoned the county and they said, no, it's the borough. And I suspect there were a few more calls being made, but she then said, they told me to go and see you. That was me. And I happen to know a thing about talking to highways officers, and I phoned this guy called Phil Crossland. And he said, I'll look into this, Max, because he didn't know, and I won't ask officers to corroborate this, but I believe what happened was that they searched around for a few weeks and found that some time ago the county council had agreed to look after the surface of this path and any surface markings, including those white lines, and the lighting, because there was some lighting that was actually installed, because I remember it, by the borough council. So they agreed to do all that, and in doing so they actually admitted, yes, that's sticky up bit of metal which had tripped over this nurse was their responsibility. And the long story, because it was a long story, was that she eventually got compensation as well as having fixed the bit of metal that was sticking up. But the crux of the thing was that someone in distress went to one authority, got told to go to another authority, got turned back to the first authority, and after some time, because she'd forgotten all about her injury by that time, it came to me. And that that would never be tolerated in an efficient organisation, one efficient organisation. But we're not one efficient organisation, we're two semi-efficient organisations in that respect. And there are many other examples I can tell you, including when you drive home tonight down Glinsills Lane. Yeah, that's one I always use. You go from Blaby bins to Charnwood bins, and Blaby sweeping to Charnwood sweeping, and you get to the A46. Enough said about that. So,
hey, thank you. That was a lovely story, actually. I was
well,
enjoying
it's something
that.
You know, those sort of things, as a councillor, stay with you.
But it was good that she had a local councillor, democracy-wise,
I felt really good about it, yeah.
I love the way you do it. You just go like over to you, Janice.
Run out of time. Thank you, Chairman. I think I have problems, or I have had in the past, with civil parking enforcement officers trying to find out where they are, and it's really, really complicated. I think I've about got to grips with it now. And also, like Max has just been referring to, I've had jitties, and it's been referred to the town council, the borough and the highways, and then they always come to the councillor when they can't get a final answer. And it's finding out that which council owns which part. So it would be good to have it all under one roof so that you knew what you were dealing with, because it is all so confusing and so out of date that we can only look forward to a better system. Thank you, Chairman.
Problem is we still have private, and we've got something in Melton called Town Estate that's got a fair bit of land. Yeah. Okay. I understand that. Yeah. Any other questions? Bill?
I'm a bit confused, Chair. Okay. On our nice pictures of recycling down here, we've got 3 columns on the
before you go on,
first
Bill,
page.
can you invite me around to your house? I'm going to look at your different bins and all your boxes.
Our bins are fine. On the second page, we've got 4 lines, including Oby and Wixton. Then we extend it, and Oby it sort of disappears. It's done. On the last page, we've got 3 columns, and Oby and Wixton's not extended like the rest. I wondered if I've been picked on purposely, or whether there's a reason for it. That was all.
If I may, Chair, I think that the short answer to this is it shows the extensive range of services that are offered. But if you were to take the first page with 3 lines on it and take the second page and continue those 3 lines, you'd have to remove the last page. You get a sense of the first 3 organisation services, all the way from recycling through residual, green waste, clinical waste, bulky waste. And then if you were to turn over and attach the same other 4 district councils and continue it on, you would get a sense of the same set of services. But it just shows you the breadth. If you had a blank piece of paper, would you start with this?
Well, it gets confusing, Chair, because they've not got headings on the top. So when you turn the page over, you think you're continuing, but you're not. You're on different authorities, so you've got to turn it over that way.
Yeah, if you'll forgive me, Chair, again, just to be clear, this hasn't been specifically prepared for this report. Again, to pick up Anne's point, we haven't done extensive work around what a unitary service for waste might look like. But within the service that I manage and the relationships we have to have with our 7 district council colleagues, this is an operational piece of information that articulates the range of activity and was arguably quite a fortuitous piece of information to share with this committee, so that it gives a sense of the breadth of the services that we have. But I acknowledge that probably the head
is that all right, but I think it's just to give you an example, it's not sort of picking on anybody.
Oh, it is, but the information's wrong on it, but that's another time.
That's the next meeting, okay.
I'll mention that to the districts and their websites.
Okay, I think we bring that agenda item to the end. I think we've really done well. I'd like to congratulate everybody. I don't feel there's anything more needs to be explored. I think we've explored everything tremendously. I'd like to thank all the staff, Joe, Tom, and Ian, Declan, doing a great job. We really appreciate support. I once again, just to say what Max, and I know a lot of people on the committee, I'm very proud to be involved with the transport environment, because you do a very good job. Again, I love driving to other counties and going, I like to get back to Leicestershire because our roads are tremendous, and you're doing a really good job. It's been a long day. I'd like to thank you all. Have a safe journey home, and I'm sure we'll continue this programme and discussion, and hopefully we'll sort of make a change and make the best for the future. So have a lovely evening. God bless you, and thank you very much. And the next meeting, before I go, I've got my paperwork, is the 17th of January. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Well chaired.